What would you say if you had the chance to speak to a former US president in front of hundreds of people surrounded by cameras at Buckingham Palace? And what could possibly happen in that moment to make a man who's spoken to world leaders fall completely silent? Well, that's exactly what happened when a royal guard did something no one expected and left the former president in awe. You won't believe what happened next. Before we dive into the full story, hit that subscribe button and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The sun broke gently through the early haze above Buckingham Palace, casting pale gold light across the black wrought iron gates and the gravel forecourt that had seen centuries of tradition unfold without flinch or fanfare. Summer in London was always unpredictable, but that morning held a stillness, the kind that made tourists walk a little slower, speak a little softer, as if the walls themselves demanded it. Lance Corporal Mason Hargreaves stood at his post near the palace gates, unmoving. At 38, he had the kind of presence that made tourists hesitate before raising their camera, not because of his height or posture, but because of the calm that radiated from him. The red tunic fit with a precision few civilians noticed. Gold buttons polished to mirror shine, and his white gloves hung at his sides as if gravity itself respected his composure. He was a royal guard now, yes, but before that he had been something else. A combat medic with the 3rd Rifles, deployed twice to Afghanistan, and though no medals showed on his chest, ceremonial dress didn't permit them. The silence he carried was heavier than any hardware. That morning the forecourt was already filling. A group of school children clustered near the edge, chaperones flapping maps and checklists. A German tour group stood precisely aligned, holding up miniature Union Jacks. American voices drifted through the air, curious and animated, then a shift in energy. Not panic, not even alarm, just awareness. The way a room changes when someone familiar but important walks in. Barack Obama had arrived. He wasn't flanked by an overwhelming detail, just 2 local attachés and 1 discreet security figure wearing the kind of expression that said, "Keep moving." No fanfare, no speech. Just a former president and global icon, taking in the palace with the curiosity of a thoughtful traveller. Tourists quickly realised what was happening. A woman gasped. Phones came up. The schoolchildren started whispering excitedly. Obama smiled, nodded politely, and took a slow walk along the rope line, absorbing the sight of the guards with genuine interest. He stopped near Mason's post. For a moment he said nothing. Then, in that unmistakable voice, low, warm, a touch of amusement, he murmured to his attaché, "I wonder what it takes to get one of them to blink." The attaché chuckled nervously. "Sir, I don't think they do." A few of the nearby tourists caught the line and giggled. A teenage girl from Ohio repeated it louder. "They're like statues. Bet they're not even real." Her brother, emboldened, added, "They probably play poker behind those gates and take turns standing still." More laughter rippled through the group. Phones were raised. Someone tried to get a selfie with Mason perfectly in frame, as if the guard was a backdrop, not a man. Mason didn't move. He didn't blink, but he heard every word, not out of offence. This wasn't new. He'd heard worse. But there was something about this day. Something about the weight of being watched by someone who understood public service. Someone who had stood still himself in far more figurative ways. Across the rope, Obama kept his gaze on Mason. His smile was gentler now. "That's discipline," he said to no one in particular. "I respect that." He said it with a quiet that cut through the laughter. Some nearby tourists shifted awkwardly. The humour, which had come easily just seconds ago, suddenly felt. A child near the front, maybe 6, curly-haired, still holding onto her mum's hand, looked up at Mason and asked, "Is he sad, Mum? He looks like he's thinking about something." The mother didn't answer. She was too busy trying to get a clear photo. Mason remained motionless, but the words echoed somewhere deep inside him. "Not Are you real? Not, what's your playlist? Just, he looks like he's thinking? Was. About the war. About the men he'd carried who didn't come home. About one US Marine named Harris, barely 20, whose blood had soaked through his gloves before the bird ever arrived. About what it meant to stand still. Not for show, but because some things deserved reverence. He hadn't moved. But inside, something had. The changing of the guard ceremony progressed with its usual precision. Boots striking gravel in perfect rhythm, rifles angled just so, uniforms flawless from every angle, but even within the timeless pageantry, a low current of tension had begun to hum, visible only to those who knew what to look for. Lance Corporal Mason Hargreaves resumed his post along the east edge of the forecourt, now opposite Private Jenkins, a younger guard positioned just within conversational range, if either of them had been the type to talk during shift. They weren't, not unless it mattered, but Jenkins leaned slightly, just enough for his voice to carry low and dry. "You see who that is?" Mason didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed forward. "Obama," Jenkins murmured unnecessarily. "No kidding. Man looks shorter in real life. Still carries himself like he owns the place, though, doesn't he?" Still no response. Jenkins shifted again. "The girl was right, you know. You do look like you're thinking." Mason didn't blink, but the words stayed with him. He wasn't thinking about Barack Obama, not directly. He was thinking about the boy from Maine, Corporal Jake Harris, just 19, left-handed, played guitar during downtime. They'd shared a makeshift shelter during a 3-day dust storm in Helmand. Harris had said once, half joking, "If I don't make it, tell the president I gave him my vote." Mason had carried him under gunfire 2 weeks later. Harris had died on the chopper. Nobody ever asked Mason what he did that day. Nobody needed to. He just stood still and moved forward, like he always did. Now, all these years later, the man Harris had voted for was standing just 30 feet away, making tourists laugh. Jenkins finally gave up on the conversation. Mason didn't mind. Some thoughts didn't belong to noise. The crowd, meanwhile, had grown thicker. Word had spread that a former US president was on site. Tourists surged closer to the rope line, some elbowing their way forward with too much excitement, others craning phones above their heads to get it all on video. And with that crowd came more noise, more chances for people to forget where they were. A pair of American teens near the front started recording on TikTok, narrating their video with mock seriousness. Here we have the royal mannequins, genetically engineered to ignore humans. Will they react to sound? One clapped loudly, right next to Mason. He didn't move. The other cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "Hey, big man! Bet even the Americans could make you smile." More laughter. A couple of British tourists chuckled nervously, unsure whether to join in or distance themselves. That was the thing about mob humour. It didn't take much to tip either way. Obama, who had continued lingering at the edge of the rope, heard it too. His head turned slowly. The smile faded. His brows drew together, not with anger, but something quieter. Disappointment. The attaché leaned closer. "Sir, we can move you to the private viewing area if you'd prefer." Obama shook his head. "Number, I want to stay here. Let's see how this plays out." A small hush passed through the cluster around him, the same way people quiet when a teacher stops walking. And yet Mason didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't give anyone what they wanted. To the hecklers he was unreadable. To Obama he was intentional. The guards rotated again. A ceremonial footfall, a step, a turn. The tourists leaned in, phones lifted, all waiting for something extraordinary to break the rhythm, as if stillness itself wasn't already extraordinary. Jenkins shifted during the march past Mason. Their eyes never met, but his voice came again, soft as a sigh. They don't get it. What it means to just not move, to carry things quiet. Mason said nothing, because that, too, was the job. He stood in a storm of noise and cameras and assumptions, and he thought about Harris. about the boy's laugh in the dust storm, about the blood on his gloves, about standing over a body bag and telling no one what it did to him. Discipline wasn't about being unfeeling. It was about choosing when to feel. And right now, the time wasn't yet, but it was coming. Ceremony continued. Mason rotated once more toward the western post, nearer the main gate, nearer to the knot of onlookers that had begun to swell around the figure of Barack Obama. The tourists who recognized him were whispering, filming, or nudging their companions. Those who didn't were simply reacting to the shift in mood. The atmosphere had begun to change. The guards executed their turns with razor precision, each movement a thread in the tapestry of centuries-old protocol. Mason moved like water in armour, one fluid step at a time, the weight of his bearskin hat perfectly balanced, his gloved hands a study in stillness. But inside, he could feel something approaching. Not emotion exactly, not memory either, just readiness. As he turned the final corner on his ceremonial march, Mason passed within 20 feet of where Obama stood. The former president wasn't trying to be the centre of attention now. He had stepped just slightly back, allowing others to surge forward, letting the crowd do what it always did: capture, speculate, forget. But as Mason came level, Obama spoke. Not loudly, not theatrically, just enough that the nearby crowd heard it clearly. "Thank you," he said. The words weren't directed to anyone in particular, but they weren't casual either. There was weight behind them. Mason didn't stop walking, not immediately, but halfway through his turn, mid-step, his boot hesitated for half a second, no more than a blink. But it was not regulation, not part of the drill. The gasp from the crowd was immediate. The tourists didn't know what they were seeing, not really, but they knew it was something. Mason resumed his rotation like nothing had happened. But in the crowd, a little boy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad," he stopped. "Only a little," the man replied, eyes narrowed, "but I saw it too." At the edge of the barrier, Obama's expression didn't change, but he exhaled, slow, steady, almost like relief. Captain Rutherford, the shift commander, had seen it too. From his position near the palace wall, he tensed slightly, but didn't move. He knew Mason, had served with him before. If that man paused, even for half a heartbeat, there was a reason. 20 minutes later, after another silent round of rotations, Mason found himself stationed just inside the ornate black and gold gate, within closer proximity to the rope line. His post now placed him in direct view of the crowd's densest knot, where Obama remained, hands clasped in front, observant but restrained. The drizzle began then. Soft, polite, the way London rain often introduces itself. No thunder, no warning, just an invitation to close your coat. Tourists put up umbrellas and hooded jackets. One guard shifted ever so slightly beneath the brim of his bearskin, angling his face away from the moisture. Not Mason, he remained still. Until the child returned. The same curly-haired girl from earlier, now beneath her father's umbrella, stepped toward the rope line again. She looked up at Mason with absolute seriousness, both arms stiff at her sides. Then, carefully and without prompting, she raised both hands in what she must have thought was a proper salute. It was clumsy, crooked, and beautiful. Her father chuckled, embarrassed. "Sweetheart, that's not how—" But Mason did something then. He didn't break posture. He didn't step forward. He simply lowered his eyes just slightly until they met the child's gaze. It lasted only a moment, but it changed everything. A visible ripple passed through the crowd. Phones dropped. Mouths opened. Several people murmured at once. The little girl smiled so wide it looked like her face might split. Obama saw it all, and without thinking, without fanfare, he stepped to the rope line and spoke again, this time more clearly. "British discipline is no joke, but it's not just training, is it?" he said. "It's about memory, about sacrifice, about things we can't see." Silence. Even the security detail looked up, and that's when Mason did it. He stepped forward. Just one step. Deliberate, controlled. Against every ounce of training, another gasp from the crowd. A mother covered her mouth. A man dropped his phone. And in a voice calm, clear, and shaped by years of holding grief beneath stillness, Mason said, "Sir, we stand still. So others don't have to." That was all. 7 words, but the moment they landed, the world changed. Obama blinked. His jaw slackened. One of his hands reached halfway toward his chest. The attaché took an instinctive step forward, unsure if something had gone wrong. But nothing had gone wrong. Something had gone right. For a full second, maybe 2, nothing moved. Not the tourists, not the guards, not even the pigeons that had been flitting along the outer railings. It was as if those 7 words had pressed a weight into the forecourt. A momentary stillness far heavier than silence. Barack Obama stood with his hand hovering just over his heart. He wasn't crying, not yet. But his eyes had shifted, glossed over, blinking with slow deliberation. He delivered countless speeches, stared down heads of state, comforted grieving families. But there was something about that line, that man, that had pierced him in a way public life never quite prepared you for. "We stand still, so others don't have to." The attaché beside him cleared his throat, quietly. "Sir?" But Obama didn't answer. His gaze was still on Mason, who had resumed his stance, posture locked, eyes forward, white gloves unmoving at his sides. It was as if the words had come from somewhere else entirely, somewhere deeper. "Who is he?" Obama asked finally, voice quieter now. "I'll find out," the attaché murmured. "But they don't usually release names." Obama gave a faint nod. "Doesn't matter. I'll remember the line instead." A few feet away, one of the teen hecklers from earlier shifted uncomfortably. The joke had long since died. The smirks were gone. Even his phone, still recording, hung limply in his hand. "That was real," he muttered to his friend. His friend just nodded, too stunned to reply. Slowly, respectfully, the crowd began to rearrange. Some tourists backed away from the rope line, as though realizing they'd been standing too close to something sacred. A woman in her 50s quietly lowered her camera and pressed a poppy pin to her coat. And then came the first clap. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even fully confident. Just a slow, reverent pat of palm to palm. It came from the left, a man in a wheelchair, his military beret crooked slightly on his grey head. Another veteran near him joined, then a woman, then a child. The applause wasn't thunderous. It wasn't a celebration, it was gratitude, measured, respectful, as if the very sound of it understood what had just been spoken into the air. The guards remained still. Of course they did, but there was a subtle difference now, not in posture, but in presence. Mason especially seemed to radiate something new. Not pride, not defiance, just truth, worn without apology. Obama wiped his face discreetly. It wasn't quite a tear, but it was close. "I've never heard anything like it," he said, almost to himself. The attaché nodded. "Neither have I." From the side, Captain Rutherford stepped forward, protocol caught in his throat. He looked at Mason, at the man who had, in one sentence, said more than most men say in a lifetime. The captain opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Resume ceremonial position," he said simply. Mason didn't answer. He didn't have to. His foot slid back, his chin lifted, and once again he became the immovable figure the tourists thought he had always been. But the crowd knew better now. They didn't see a man trapped in protocol. They saw a man carrying something. Obama stepped back, took one last look and turned to his team. "We're done here," he said softly. "Let's give the man his post." As they moved to leave, the little girl who had saluted earlier whispered something to her father. "Did he talk because of me?" Her father knelt beside her, uncertain. I think he remembered something. And you helped him do that." He looked sad when he said it. "Yes, but strong too." The girl nodded solemnly, then stood straighter, copying the posture she'd seen in Mason. For a moment, her small frame mirrored his, so perfectly it stopped another tourist mid-step. And then, just as quietly as it had come, the moment passed. The crowd began to drift, but no one would forget what they heard, not because it was loud, but because it was true. As the forecourt slowly returned to motion, the space held an unmistakable shift in atmosphere. The tourists were still present, the guards still stationed, the drizzle still falling in fine streaks over stone and scarlet wool. But the mood had turned reverent. You could hear it in the way people walked, slower now, in the way their voices dropped to murmurs, in the absence of laughter. Obama had made it only halfway down the outer path before he stopped once more. Behind him, his team paused instinctively, sensing the hesitation. He looked back. Mason hadn't moved since stepping back into place. He was again the perfect silhouette of duty, the tall figure in red-black bearskin rising above the crowd, white gloves still. But he was no longer anonymous, not to them. A local BBC camera crew had just arrived, tipped off by a palace staff member who'd heard something about a guard speaking out of turn. They started unpacking gear, but something about the tone of the scene gave them pause. The producer hesitated. The cameraman looked through his viewfinder, then pulled back. "There's something different," he muttered. "This isn't just viral, this is something else." A young woman in the crowd, maybe in her 20s, tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mum, that guard, he just talked to Obama. You saw it, didn't you?" Her mother nodded. "I did, but it wasn't just the talking. It was what he said." Across the gravel, Mason's fellow guard, Private Jenkins, remained expressionless. But under his breath, as he rotated past Mason, he whispered just loud enough, "Mate, you stopped the world for a second." Mason didn't reply. He couldn't. The rules were rules, but he heard it. He held on to it. Back toward the rope line, the elderly veteran who had begun the applause earlier now sat quietly in his wheelchair, his beret pushed back slightly, as if trying to catch more of the drizzle on his face. A younger man beside him, possibly his grandson, leaned in. "Grandad, why are you crying?" "I'm not," the old man lied. Then he cleared his throat. I know what it costs to stand still like that, and what it costs when you don't." The grandson didn't quite understand, but he didn't ask again. One of the teens who had jeered earlier, the one with the phone still recording, tapped through his footage silently. His fingers paused over the play button. Then, without comment, he pressed delete. His mate looked at him, surprised. "Why'd you—" "I don't know," the boy said. "Didn't feel right. Like, that moment wasn't ours to film." He looked across the forecourt again. Mason stood as still as ever, but something in the teen's expression had changed, the slack confidence replaced by something tighter, smaller. Respect, perhaps, or maybe just recognition. Barack Obama paused near the gate where his car now waited. A staff member held the door open, but he didn't get in yet. Instead, he turned to his attaché and said, "Send word to the palace liaison. Don't need a name. Just tell them. That guard reminded me what leadership looks like." The attaché nodded. "Understood, sir." As the convoy pulled away, more tourists trickled into the forecourt, unaware of what they'd missed. But those who had been there began to spread the story in soft voices, not in the tone of gossip, but the tone of witnesses. Not one person described it as dramatic. No one embellished the line. They repeated it exactly, quietly. "We stand still, so others don't have to." The phrase became a whisper passed between generations. A father to a son, a veteran to a teenager, a tourist to a guide. A phrase that somehow explained everything without revealing anything at all. Back inside the palace perimeter, Captain Rutherford made a quiet note in his shift report. An unofficial line, not protocol, not disciplinary. Hargreaves broke formation briefly, during presence of former US President. No disruption, crowd response non-hostile, verbal engagement contained. He paused, then added, "Atmosphere reverent." He underlined the word once. No further action required. The changing ceremony concluded just before noon. As the crowd thinned and drizzle turned to mist, the guards filed back into the inner courtyard, through the palace archway, one by one. Boots crisp against stone, discipline unshaken. Hargreaves was among the last. The moment he stepped out of public view, his shoulders dropped by a barely perceptible degree. Still straight, still proper, but not ceremonial, just human. He removed his bare skin with quiet efficiency, the heavy wool-lined helmet leaving a red imprint across his forehead. The dressing area was dimly lit, lined with pegs and boot racks, smelling faintly of polish and old rain. Private Jenkins appeared a moment later, removing his gloves slowly. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. Mason didn't answer immediately. He folded his gloves with care, then replied, "Fine." Jenkins nodded. Captain didn't say anything. Just a nod. They sat on opposite benches in the quiet. Mason pulled off his tunic, revealing the sweat-darkened undershirt beneath, and set it over his lap with reverence. "You know," Jenkins said eventually, "if you ever wanted to talk about that moment, I reckon the lads would listen. I didn't do it for them." "I know." A pause. "You did it for him." Mason hesitated. "I did it for Harris." Jenkins frowned. "Harris?" "Jake Harris, U.S. Marine, 19. Carried him out under fire." He stared at the floor for a moment. "Didn't make it." Silence stretched. Jenkins said nothing. Just let the weight of the name settle. "He used to joke," Mason continued. "Said if anything happened to him, tell the president he voted for him." Jenkins let out a faint, breathy chuckle. "Guess you just did." Mason cracked the barest smile. "Yeah, I guess I did." Later that afternoon, Barack Obama stood behind a podium at the Royal Institute for Global Dialogue. The room was packed. Diplomats, journalists, scholars. Cameras live-streamed every second. But in the middle of his carefully prepared speech on cooperation and unity, he veered off script. "Earlier today," he began, "I stood at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by tourists, tradition, and centuries of ceremonial stillness." He paused, and then one of the guards spoke. Gasps murmured across the audience, a few nervous laughs. Some assumed he was exaggerating. "I won't share his name," Obama continued. "He didn't give it. He didn't need to. But he said something that I haven't been able to shake." He looked out across the sea of suits and lights. "We stand still, so others don't have to." The room was dead silent now. "That's what leadership is," Obama said. "That's what service is. And that, in 7 words, might be the most powerful summary of duty I've ever heard." The clip went viral within the hour. But back at Wellington Barracks, Mason didn't watch the speech. He was repolishing his boots, checking his tunic, running a lint roller down his belt for dust that wasn't there. That's what the job required. And the next morning, when he returned to post, a small black plaque had been affixed to the inside of the guardhouse wall. Discreet, unobtrusive, seen only by those on shift. It read, "We stand still, so others don't have to." Unknown guard. Mason saw it, said nothing. Just adjusted his gloves, squared his shoulders, and stepped out onto the forecourt, ready again. What would you have said in the guard's place? With the whole world watching, do you think Obama's reaction was justified? Or do those words speak for all of us? And here's the real question. Is stillness its own kind of strength? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. If this story moved you even a little, give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and tap the bell icon so you never miss one of our daily Royal Guard stories. And if you know someone who still thinks these guards are just for show, share this video with them. It might change how they see everything behind the red. Your next story's already on screen. Click it now, and we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.